You have learned who these wonderful people are here in the stage and their perspectives and their views and their roles in the higher education society. I wonder, maybe we can tell them who we are by raising hands again. So who of you defined yourself as a student? Yeah? Teacher? Academic staff? Stakeholders? Anybody that didn't feel mentioned? Fantastic. Let's go. I assume that you have many questions, but mainly I do have one myself. Before every ministerial conference of the Bologna process, European Students' Union is launching a publication called Bologna with Student Eyes. Bologna with Student Eyes is looking into the communiques and following up on what has actually been implemented from the student perspective. Of course, there is the report from EUA, there is the report that is the general one from Eurydice, that is also looking into what is happening, and we also have Euro Student, but at the same time, we don't have the one of the student perspective besides the one that Bologna Student Eyes presents. I was the author and editor of this publication last year, and when we look into the chapters about and recommendations from Bologna with Student Eyes regarding student-centered learning, and following up on what has been both stated in the previous communiques and how the status looks from the perspective of the student unions all across Europe where we have members of ASU. The author of the chapter, Alexander Schuschner, about students and learners, says that at the same time students need to become co-creators of their educational experience, both through formal inclusion and governance at all levels and through informal interactions and planning. Both internal and external quality assurance systems need to effectively assess the learning and teaching, encourage innovation. So basically here, once again, we look at that we are still not there. The student-centered learning has been a part of the communiques for a very long time, and as you also mentioned, Manja. And as well on the chapter that is looking into the future of the Bologna process, written by me, future of the Bologna process is the future of the process depending on the past. Basically, if implementation of agreed commitment does not function, finances are clearly not allocated, leaving the implementation at a low level and not satisfactory quality. Students call on allocating the resources needed to implement and make sure that implementation is of high quality. Real commits to equal importance, and like all the different standards are equally important and sustainable, even if the end of the Bologna is maybe approaching. It was a year ago since I wrote this publication and edited it, and there's been many reflections afterwards, and of course many discussions that had come up to there. Of course, the discussion was normally that there was the lack of finances, and that is the problem, as well as sometimes the teachers has been blamed, like they're lazy, they don't want to interact, they don't want to move from the teacher-centered learning to the student-centered learning. Meanwhile, there is also the debate ongoing about students and millennials being lazy and not caring, and millennials not wanting to interact, and that is the future generations. There's many different statements saying why can't we not move towards having the education student-centered, and many problems. We see and we hear your fantastic presentations of how we can move forward, and I very much thank you for that. But I want to kick off this little discussion a little bit with the challenging question about where does the responsibility of the institution end and the one of the individual start in the learning process, because we all know that we need to have higher education in the future as well, but where does it start? How do we, is it the fault of the millennial, or is it the institution, or is it the governance? Where does it fail? And where does the responsibility transfer from the institution to the individual?
There are obviously multiple responsibilities that are shared. There is a need for a structural change, and I was advocating for having a comprehensive framework so that it doesn't continue to be ambiguous what student-centered learning means, because in the present times you can basically get away with anything. If a QA evaluation panel comes in and there is a question for student, do you comply with the student-centered learning approaches? There is a possibility to kind of a cherry pick and showcase this and that. It's at the moment, it's almost, it's what teachers can also choose what's comfortable for them to implement. So we haven't had a comprehensive framework, enough of guidelines that would actually prompt this discussion within each study program in the same way that we have prompted this discussion when it came to the adoption of qualification frameworks and translating the courses into the ECTS. But the real work, hard work, and you know those that you have been involved, has happened at the institution level, within the departments, with all of the faculty involved, and the same kind of a discussion has to happen again. And again, you know, it's not going to be each course that will have all of these different elements and all of the activities and the field work and the work-based study and project-based studies, but it has to be clearly discussed. If I have within my study program, how many? 40 courses. What happens in each course, and how do you teach fundamental knowledge? How do you teach intro courses? What do you actually do in the classroom? This is something that has to be discussed between the colleagues within the departments, and at what stage are we able to send them out to do a wonderful work that Olga and her colleague have been doing? In which way are those opportunities part of each program, so that each student within the study program can do that? And I think that probably then the first message has to be from the top leadership of the institutions, giving guidelines and the expectation to the departments, and then the work will have to happen within the departments. And I hope that from the European level, of course, the various financial incentives can happen to make this possible, that then trickle down through the national systems into the institutions to draw on, so that they can buy people time to do the course development, or especially if I would be putting money in, I would be putting it into the technology, learning technologies, and I would be putting into the learning and analytics. This stuff costs a lot, but if you buy it, then people come and do the user training and how to use it, because it's really, it can help, especially when we have a massive enrollments, and it especially helps for flexible learning pathways and individualized learning support. And this is what is important when we have diverse student population with different learning needs, with different gaps in knowledge. We need this kind of a data to help everyone succeed, rather than, as it was in the case of my school, half of them will drop out after the first year in any case. You know.
If I could add to that, I think there's two aspects to your question. One is, what is the problem? Second, whose problem is it? I think the problem is that we have an old-fashioned idea of education in our heads. When we say university education, the image that comes to mind is still students in lecture hall listening to expert teacher. And that is because the people who are now running higher education institutions went to university 30, 40 years ago. And so their idea also is shaped by their experience. That's the problem. Whose problem it is? Well, it's our problem. We are educators. We get paid to teach students, and we are asking students to give us 3 or 4 or 5 years of their lives. That is what we're asking. That's a big ask. And it seems to me that if we want to ask that of students, it's our responsibility to make sure that we offer them an education not for where we were 40 years ago, but where we will be. As Wayne Gretzky pointed out, right? Don't skate where the puck is, skate where the puck will be. Don't teach where we are, teach where we will be. That's our job, and we'll do it well.
And if I can just ask, we were thinking in the past of students as learners, right, in the classroom. Nowadays, students have multiple roles within the universities. Students as researchers, co-researchers, undergraduate students involved in the research teams, students as co-teachers, as undergraduate research teaching assistants. We see students adopt various administrative roles in the universities that know and are aware of this valuable resource that they have. So students are part of the information technology system, students are part of the programming for the student affairs of international office, and all of that are two learning opportunities. All of that is in line with the student-centered approach, where we are affording students variety of multiple learning opportunities.
It's a tricky question, and I don't have the answer either. Thank you very much for your perspectives. I want to move a little bit more into Tone's presentation, you, Mattia and Olga. I don't know if you have already started to move out from the academic bubble and into the other world called labor market sometimes. It's often debated that if you don't, like it's part of the marketization as well as a debate about like how you can be employed. Like so basically, what can you do? Like, are you an engineer? Like the classic, back again to the thought about like we are like where like higher education institutions are kind of a factory delivering people that are fit in a form and a shape that is perfect for doing a certain job. You have both now, or you're about to get your diplomas in liberal arts. Have you been challenged with this? And do you have the perfect counter arguments to say and showcase that you basically have maybe a even deeper understanding of society for the purpose of employability as well?
So at least for me, next year I will be going to China to study full-time for 1 year Chinese language. But what I've seen in my various, let's say, job interviews for internships and stuff, is that I actually see when they ask questions, they're not testing me on factual knowledge or if I'm able to come up with, let's say, all the rules out of the rule book that I learned, but rather actually the employers that I've been interacting with in interviews actually look for skills that I've learned through this student-centered learning. So critical thinking and being able to look outside of the box, right? So what I'm actually seeing is that there's no need necessarily for me to convince the employer that I am a good student, even though maybe I haven't followed a traditional path. But I often see that actually the employers themselves, or the interviewers in that case for me, are actually interested in the skills that I have learned through student-centered learning rather than just coming up with factual knowledge that I would have learned in maybe a more traditional educational setting.
I very much agree with Mattia, but in my experience, next year I will be an alumni tutor, so I will do the teaching of the first years in our university, and for me this is a very exciting opportunity because being at UCM and studying there at our college was very much a grow for me. It was a learning opportunity. It was a process in which I started without necessarily being equipped with all the tools that I was in need of to succeed well in academia. And then with the support that I got from my tutors, with the incredible feedback I received, and with the openness of my tutors, and probably most important of all, the communication within the classroom and the freedom to ask questions that are important for me, the freedom to discuss problems and to identify those problems and to answer them ourselves, that for me was a very important part of my learning at UCM, and now I'm very excited to be able to transfer it to other students and to be there maybe to guide them from my own experience, because indeed, as Mania said, I think this is probably one of the most efficient ways of learning from others' experiences, yeah.
I think, once again, this is another zombie idea. Employers don't actually think we need to have people who know X, Y, and Z specifically, because they can teach people X, Y, and Z specifically. What is going on is that we think that employers think this. So once again, it's a matter of an old idea of higher education that simply refuses to die. The reality is, I think it's Emerson who makes this point, that the universe makes room for people who know where they are going. So let's just teach people where they will be going, and the universe will happily accommodate.
Sounds like a fantastic ecosystem. You learned how to teach, or now you've been teaching yourself. Fantastic. I have more questions, but I assume you have too. So I will give the first question to Fernando. I happen to know the name. Fernando, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the four of the speakers. I have two very quick questions. I'm Fernando Galán, coming from the Spanish Rectors Conference, but I had different hats before. So I was in the European Student Union and also sitting in the BFEG. So my question, when you are talking about student-centered learning, is what is the role of the student assessment in student-centered learning? Because it's as important that you guide the student throughout the process, but how you actually help them to demonstrate what they have learned. And the other question, I'm going to play here Evel's advocate, and it's true that Bologna process have been talking about student-centered learning for a while in different communiques, but it's not the same to talk about three-cycle system, QA mechanisms, that you are a minister and you can propose a new law and pass through a system and gets implemented, as simple as that, than trying to change the way that teaching is happening at the classrooms. So can actually Bologna have an impact in the teaching methods at the university level?
Fernando, great questions. Assessment is an important part of student-centered learning, as you have said. It all goes back to the learning outcomes, which the instructors have worked hard to define and specify. And I would say that there are probably two things that we should keep in mind when we speak about learning assessment. One is that this high-stake, end-of-the-year, one assessment is really not very student-centered when it comes as an approach. That multiple assessments that encourage either recollection of learning or that they break up a major task into the number of smaller assessments is a way to go. But again, there are no generic solutions. It comes down to the specific course, the specific learning outcomes defined in that course, and then for those outcomes, the activities, and then to see how those activities, how the assessment within each activity should have been accomplished. And that's the thing, it's not possible to really talk about it generically, and it's not possible to talk about it just as a one format. It will all depend what is happening in that, what are the methods, what are used within that specific course. And the second dimension of the assessment is really thinking about not only what the student really has achieved within that particular course, but how the achievement or the learning within that course kind of builds up on the prior courses and is a foundation for the higher learning. So it's really thinking, some talk about student portfolios, so the students kind of build up their things. In my courses, I ask them, you can do a research paper where you can test something that you will do later on for the senior thesis. Or if you will not do a senior thesis, you can do a research project in my course that they will later on complement in another course so that you investigate a particular topic from a variety of points of view or from a variety of disciplines. And I ask them to keep that final outcome, to keep your research project. That's a part of your portfolio. This is something that you're taking on. I even go a step further. I showcase it. I publish it on the website so that others can see it. And if the students know that others will see it, especially if their peers and the rest of the people will see it, they really, really work much harder on that than if they know it's just going to be me and it's just for the grade. So I try to create the assessment that will have some kind of an impact. If it's a foundational course, it's a different story, of course. You have to show them how that will help them to do more later on, how that is part of the sequence of their learning pathway within the college. So this is thing. And the second one, can Bologna do it? If we have done it with the qualification frameworks and with the ECTS, which was very, very hard, and the Bologna has intervened deep down into the study programs. And if we have done it with the quality assurance standards and guidelines, where we have made massive changes, including bringing students to the table, onto the evaluation panels, I believe that we can do it in the same way for the question on how we teach. It's not easy, and we have to respect the academic integrity of individual teachers, and it's not about policing, but it is checking what it is that is actually happening in the classroom and how the intended learning outcomes are to achieve. What kind of activities do we choose? We can pitch it as a sharing of good practices. Toyin will tell me what he does in his class, I'll tell him what I do, and we can maybe borrow something from each other in terms of the approaches that we have. So it's possible. I think it's possible.
Well, briefly, if the point of education is to teach people reflective judgment, the assessment also has to reflect that. If we think of education as having people internalize knowledge, that's what the assessment is, and that is multiple choice exams, what did the teacher say, style questions. But if we're looking to teach people how to make reflective judgments, we can't look at the answer they get. We have to look at how they get to the answer. Because everybody, depending on the choices they make and the values that they feel are important, will come up with different solutions to the problems. And that means that you have to assess not necessarily on the outcome, what answer did you give us, but rather, how did you get to that answer? How well did you weigh the various perspectives? How well did you show awareness of the effects of different possible ways of looking at it? And what answer do you ultimately choose? And can you justify that? And that's why we at UCM, and maybe Mattia or Olga can say something about that, we really invest a lot in written papers, in research, in presentations, in getting students to make explicit their thinking process, right? Perhaps you could say something about
As I said earlier, in our first year, we're all confronted with this project which is called Research Methods. One, which is a project in which we can choose our methodology, so we choose a topic of research and we have the full freedom to choose the ways in which we want to explore it. So for me, throughout the 3 years of university, I did qualitative methodology in which I went out there and I talked to people, I interviewed them based on the interviewed guide that I developed myself. And that was an incredible learning experience because I didn't wait for 3 years and until, I don't know, last year of university where I finally can do a research and try it out. I tried it out from the first year and I was confronted with the problems that arise in the process of research and I learned how to cope with them and I don't know, I consulted books, I consulted tutors and their expertise, and in this way I think I actually learned how to learn, right? And learned how to explore the world and learn how to design my own inquiries and my own research questions. And yeah, in this way I got an actual sense of the academia and an actual sense of how to do research rather than just waiting for that final project in the end of 3 years and where you finally get one chance to do research. So in this sense, I think we've been quite lucky with that. Time is starting to run out. We have 5 minutes left, so I would propose that I collect 2 more questions. We picked 3 questions because we have 3 hands. We have Ben, we have the lady in pink, and we have one here. Who would like to start? You start.
Okay, I would like to address specifically Professor Decker because of my interests and my personal story. I am a philosophy student here at University of Bologna. This is the end of my 2nd year, and my specific focus is the intersection between artificial intelligence and political philosophy. Ooh. So also your personal interest could be near mine. But I would like to say about the executive aspect of implementing the policies of a reflective style in education, that I have experienced the rightly opposite style here at my university. I have experienced a professor that told me, if you have a specific interest, why are you staying here? If you want to have an individualized curriculum for an exam, or to study other literature, you aren't expected to do so because you have to follow my approach to the text I want you to study. Mm-hmm. And if the Italian politics does not structure the university curriculum in a way that I can call a centralized liberalism, when you can set the minimum requirements, but you have the opportunity to reach higher as you want and to also be recognized for your own merit, because we have also a problem of meritocracy here in Italy, also in academics, because you don't have the opportunity to apply for scholarships because there aren't scholarships. You have not the opportunity to be published, for example, because you have to follow a certain path. My first paper that will be published would be about this conference, because I am an author for this conference. But my question is, if the central system does not allow you to do so, like it is in the Netherlands, how can you do this?
Well, I think
we will collect 3 questions, sure, since time is running out. Thank you very much. Please keep it short and neat so we get to hear all the interesting aspects and perspectives from our fantastic panelists. Lady in pink, please introduce yourself.
My name is Fanny Stylianidou. I'm a representative of the National Agency of Erasmus Plus in Greece, but I'm speaking from my own expertise, which is many years of research in science education, in school education. And I have to say this student-centered learning has been an issue in school education over almost the past 50 years, I have to say now. And I should hope that by now the students that are coming to your universities are, in a sense, used to standard learning techniques. Not all of them, but a big number of them. So is this now coming a little bit lagging behind in higher education. Is this kind of a demand now from the students that are coming into higher education? These students, I'm guessing that are also quite used to these techniques, the high impact techniques. Do they demand that there is a continuation in this? And what is kind of the next step if the students are already used to these techniques, if the students have already used them extensively? What is the next step for higher education in terms of just sort of repeating them in different contexts, or is there a step further?
Thank you. And Ben.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for your great presentations. I'm Benjamin Seal, International Officer of FZS, German Students' Union, and also part as a national expert of the advisory group on learning and teaching of our beautiful process. So I'm a student, and that's why I want to ask a question concerning teachers. Manja Klemencic, you mentioned in your talk, which I think is very right, that student-centered learning is not leaving teachers out of education, but the exact opposite. And it's a huge challenge also for teachers to adapt, and also they have much more and much, very important roles in this. So how would you say do we as education institutions, also as governments, need to support teachers in the shift towards student-centered learning?
So the first on the mic, turn. I think the first question is for you.
Thank you. I guess there's two levels to answering your question. One is the activist level, right? Fight, fight, fight. You have absolutely a right to demand the education that you feel is right for you, and you have a right and perhaps even an obligation to make that case. Because, hey, all these professors, they all believe in, at least they say they believe in dialogue, they believe in arguments, let's give them some arguments, right? And of course, if nothing else, the Bologna process and the student input that we've seen demonstrates that student voices are often heard in many places. So number one is dedicate yourself to what you believe in and be prepared for a long, hard, exciting fight to, if not, get the education you want to make sure that future generations will. Number two, on your individual life, never, ever, ever let the university get in the way of your education, right? You have an idea of what you want, clearly. You have an idea of what you want to do. So just do it, and if that doesn't happen in class, then find friends where you can organize that yourself. Vote with your feet if you have to. Come to the Netherlands, we'd love to have you. And organize your own education, because maybe the height of student education, maybe the absolute most exciting and most instructional kind of student education happens when the system is against you and you make it happen for yourself anyway. That's the real deal.
Manja, maybe you would like to take the two last ones.
Yes, I will tackle the question, is higher education behind the lower schooling level when it comes to instructional practices? I would say yes. Absolutely yes. There was expectations that those that have conducted their research and have been granted their PhD degrees will know how to teach that particular within their disciplines, and that has not proven to be right. So we are picking up, and I think that the cross-fertilization between lower level of schooling, high schools and elementary schools, and their teaching methods are now pouring into the higher education instructional preparations, let's say. And I would say, the diligence that you teach school teachers, how they have to prepare for every single classroom, what will happen in that classroom, what activities, this is something should be expected of us as well in the higher education level. We should know what happens if tomorrow a car hits me and I'm unable to go into my classroom. I should have enough material prepared that somebody else from my department should be able to pick up and teach decently. They will, of course, not be so good as me because I designed that course, but they should be able to do a good job, right? They should be able to do a good job. So we are picking up. And the question is, are the lower schooling level preparing students to be active, to have their agency, to embrace their agency, to fight for their rights, to make expectations on teachers, not to accept if it's just an hour lecture with no interaction whatsoever. That's something that has to happen before as well. And if it doesn't happen, there has to be enough of the examples among the courses that students see that these are the practices that are desirable and that they are pushing for it through the course evaluations, through the student representatives, through the students sitting in the quality assurance panels, that this kind of demands are made, that these are the practices that are acceptable. And finally, the question about how do we support the teachers. It's an excellent question. How do we support the teachers and what we expect of the higher education teachers, right? Supporting is, there has to be new rules and regulations discussed within each individual institutions in terms of rules for promotions, on hiring, on the workload, on the professional training when it comes specifically to the teaching practices. I mean, it's an old discussion that too much attention has been paid on what people publish and too little attention has been paid on what they teach and how they perform as teachers. And that conversation has to change. But in order to, but part of that conversation has to be as well, what kind of support structures we have for our teachers. Does the university have a teaching learning support center where they can have a workshop or they can get mentoring, or there is somebody who create the guidelines on best impact, high impact practices in student-centered learning? And then if we have given them this, are there incentives from the institution financial for course development that will be bringing in student-centered practices that will prompt the teachers to go outside their usual routines and develop community partnerships, create field work, create project-based learning, et cetera, Are there incentives that they can actually develop technology, bring in technology for the individualized instructions? All of that is the question. And then we can ask for them to show how they actually teach. You know, before I said you should be able to ask every teacher to not only give you your syllabus with the readings and the assessment, that each teacher should be able to show the entire portfolio, every planning, course design for each individual session in class, so that you know that they have been mindful, that they actually implement the student-centered learning activities in the classroom. So that should be possible, but we cannot expect that from everyone if we haven't had the conversation within our departments and if they didn't get about how do we hire them, how do we value teaching, what kind of incentives, financial support for course development they have, and if we don't have technology that will support them in that. So I would say it's part. And just final note back to Fernando and the assessment. I have missed two important aspects of assessment, and one is the self-assessment, and that was, I was reminded that when Toon was talking about self-reflection. We have to, as part of our courses, also prompt students to self-evaluate, self-assess their own learning, to have this reflective, because that will help them to develop this metacognition about learning process and their learning trajectories. And we should allow for the peer assessment, peer-to-peer assessment, so that students are in the role of the peer-to-peer evaluators, because that too is a very powerful motivational tool and a learning tool for each individual student.
Time is running up, but I want to thank you very much, and I believe that we could have continued this debate and discussion for many more hours. So thank you very much, Teun, Olga, Katja, and Manja.